This is tape 4 with Michael Novice, tape 4 with Michael Novice. We were talking about you working in the factory.
Right.
How long did you work there again?
Worked there roughly for at least 2 years, from 42 to 44.
And then in 44, what happened?
Now in 44, in spite of the fact that we were working for the war machinery, and it was a useful thing as far as the Germans were concerned, to continue working there, they decided that because of the military situation, that they had to discontinue supplying work for the factory and just let the Poles continue with the work in the factory.
Who decided that?
The German regime, possibly orders from Berlin, or must have been a high-up decision. And so we were notified that we wouldn't go to work anymore, and we again asked to assemble at some place.
How were you notified?
By just hearing orders, which were sort of like repeated, from mouth to mouth, or from one leader, sort of an organizer, to another organizer. And before we knew where we are, we were placed in the trains, the closed cattle-type trains.
How did you get to the trains?
I cannot remember how, but the place where we worked, which was this iron smelting company, suddenly I don't remember how the Poles used to call that place, but the Germans called it by a new name, honoring one of the big leaders, and it was called Hermann Göring, who was a big Nazi. Eisenwerke. Eisen means ironworks, so Hermann Göring Eisenworks. So we were told that all work will end, and that we were to go from the barracks to assemble possibly in one place, because since it was a big ironwork kind of thing, where carriages came in with supplies all the time. In fact, a lot of our work consisted of unloading and loading these carriages once we were there. There was no difficulty of bringing those carriages right up to where we were, to the barracks, and we were loaded up, and they were incidentally closed. They were not open, they had a roof. And once the doors were closed and locked from the outside, you were in a trap, you were like in prison. And the journey must have taken about a few hours.
How many people were you in the factory?
Could be 1,000.
Were you all on these trains?
No, there were various jobs assigned.
Were all 1,000 taken away?
Yeah, right, all that. And we were all workers. There were no women, no children, no. So we were sort of, in a way, a selected group.
Did you get any food before you got on the trains?
Can't remember. Could be that we had some. And it was typically when there was just one bucket in the center.
What was the bucket for?
For urination. So.
Did you have any water?
I really cannot remember.
How old were you at this time?
That was 44. about 16 or 17.
And where was the train going?
The train, we didn't quite know where it went, but when it arrived, we could see where it was.
How did you?
We did not know where we were going. They didn't tell us. All we knew is that we heard it in the train, quite compressed, compact.
How many people per wagon?
Close to 100. Sort of standing room only. And the journey must have taken a few hours, perhaps 4 hours. I don't think it was like an overnight thing. And when it arrived, we suddenly see that, we heard that it was Auschwitz.
Did you hear about Auschwitz before?
I'm not too sure, believe it or not. I believe I have heard it. For instance, I know that Auschwitz did not exist before the war. And I think I did mention that I had some classes by a teacher, and then I heard that that teacher somehow disappeared in Auschwitz. Anyway, we somehow knew, but not all that much. Even if we heard, it would be very hard to visualize or to conceive what it was, because no one really came back from Auschwitz to report firsthand. At least not in the group I was in.
What was the first thing you saw when you exited the wagon?
First thing was an array of Nazis or German soldiers standing with sticks and dogs.
Were they talking to you?
Shouting. They deliberately created sort of panic type situations. Say, if they ask you to leave, not only this particular case, leave the carriages, but if they ask you to leave the premises, they didn't just say leave. They say rouse, 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 and then they deliberately struck you with the clubs in order to terrorize you. That was the main object. Another way of terrorizing you is that they shot people just as a sign, as a what can await you if you don't behave.
Did you see them do that?
Yeah, yeah. So when we arrived in this Auschwitz, this is what I saw. A lot of German soldiers or German Nazis, you know, what they were, with dogs, shouting for everyone to get out of the carriages and sort of line up. And after lining up and assembling, we were marched off the platform where we arrived.
When you entered the place, the premises,
Yeah. It was all open, yeah.
did it smell like anything? What was your impression of it?
I really could not remember whether I could smell anything when I first arrived. But within a day or two, we did realize what it was, and it could smell. And what we did smell was the emission from the chimneys, the crematoria, which were within just a very short distance from where we landed. So I may not remember exactly how it sort of happened, but once we ended in Auschwitz, once we landed in Auschwitz, we were place was called Birkenau. This is where you sort of like, you enter a hotel, you go to the register counter and you sort of sign a book, you know. And in this particular case, it was you had to assemble in a place and get a tattoo.
Did you get a tattoo?
Pardon?
Did you get a tattoo?
Yes, got a tattoo.
Can you show it to us?
My tattoo is here.
Can you hold it out, please?
It says B5247. And once you got this tattoo, your own name sort of was never used. Some people got a tattoo here on this side, and some camps didn't use any tattoos at all. So it was just typical, perhaps, of Auschwitz to give you the tattoo.
Was there anybody with you when you were getting the tattoo?
Yes, my two cousins, with whom I stayed together and worked in this iron factory. We tried to stay together. There was some advantage in being together, just perhaps comfort or help or something like that. So when it came to the receiving the tattoos, there were several lines, and the tattoo was actually given by other Jewish, they called them Häftlinge, the prisoners. They were, as I said before, anything the Germans could dish out for other people to do the work, they did it. You didn't require any doctors or any art. They were already pretty much trained in that. So we lined up the three cousins so that we received 3 consecutive numbers.
And what were their
mine one was the last one, the highest one.
What were your cousins' names?
One was called Samuel, Sam, Novice, and one was called Israel, Novice. And
the person who did your tattoo, you mentioned that he was Jewish?
I think the people who did the tattoo were Jewish.
Did
And everything else that was done there were sort of Jewish. And another, even the keeping of the order in the barracks where we lived was also done by Jews or by other, we call them Häftlinge, other prisoners kind of things. Some were Jewish, some were not. Some who with some sort of responsibilities, they carried the word like a capo. I don't know whether you've heard of capo. So whatever he said, you had to listen to, or you got a good beating from him.
Did you talk to the person who gave you the tattoo?
No, I don't think so. It was a little, somewhat painful, but considering everything else, considering the suffering you had before, that few minutes pain was not much to worry about.
What were you thinking about as you were getting the tattoo?
I don't really know what, but both on this occasion and on other occasions, we were so used to it and so close to death that we didn't expect to live another day. So we just took it day by day. So,
what was the next step after the tattoos for you?
well, when we worked in this place, which was the iron smelting company in Ostrovets, we were wearing civilian or normal clothes. You know, there were rags. Actually, by the end, it was sort of finished. But when we arrived in Auschwitz, the first thing was that they shaved our heads, and we were asked to undress and leave everything. And then we were sort of given like a shower. It was a real shower. And when you left that shower room, you exited through another door, sort of thing. So you never really went back to where you deposited your clothes. Although I believe they did tell you at first, just to confuse you a little bit, that you'll be coming back and keep all the clothes together, and they also usually said, if you've got something like rings or gold, or put it safe here and there. It was all pretty well organized. They knew how to manipulate people, but you never came back to the place you undressed. And when you left out, you were outfitted with the Auschwitz uniform, which was the striped pants and a jacket, and typically what they call them Mütze, cap. And it had a number.
What was the number?
I'm not too sure what the number was. It could be that the number corresponded to the number you had on your tattoo. And in addition to the number, which was somewhere here, there was a color code and sort of like a triangle. And depending whether you were a prisoner the way we were, or whether you were a political prisoner, or whether you were a gypsy, or were homosexuals, which all were there in Auschwitz. You had a different configuration. So someone who was knowledgeable, like the Germans, or perhaps even the Kappas, when they saw you, they could immediately tell where you are.
What did you have?
I don't know what I had, but whatever I had, it indicated that I was a Jew and a prisoner.
Did you encounter any gypsies in Auschwitz?
I cannot remember. Could be yes or could be no. We, in a way, we just minded our own business.
Where did you sleep, if you got to sleep?
In Auschwitz, it was more civilized than in other places, and we slept on the, I think, the 3-tier wooden planks.
How many people per bed?
It was pretty closely packed. Say, on one level there could have been perhaps one person per foot. You really had to squeeze tight. You couldn't sort of spread yourself out.
How many blankets did you have? Did you have any blankets?
I think in Auschwitz we did have a blanket, yeah. Another thing which I can say about Auschwitz compared to other camps is that when they woke you quite early, and you had to make your bed up very carefully, using sort of like a wooden board with perhaps a little handle or something, which you had to go over with on the blanket so they were nice and smooth. And if you didn't do the job properly, then it was up to the kappa to give you a beating.
Did you ever get beat because of that?
No. And now when we sort of got registered and issued this uniform in Auschwitz, after spending a few days there with not much doing, except we became familiar with the smell coming from the crematoria, and also when we were lying there, it may not be even on the beds which I just described, because it was more like a mighty big hall and everybody was just lying on the floor. I recall that in the middle of the night, some people were just being taken away from this, from the place, just to be cremated.
How did you know?
That was in the main Auschwitz or Birkenau place. Now, it was not difficult for anyone to see what was happening. both from the smell and from the disappearance of your friends, or people who were next to you. So it happened that they were looking for workers. So they wanted to have in Auschwitz, I had to sort of change in several times as I went along to say that I can do this, I can do that, just to get out of the place. So I think they asked, who is a Zimmerman? So I and a few others just raised, my cousins too, we raised our hand. I didn't even know what the word meant. What I found out later was that it was kind of a carpenter who constructed houses. Of course, there was no construction houses the way we know it here. It was a question of repairing bombed out roofs. So we volunteered, that we said we know that job. And then they, of course, wanted other jobs too, like electricians or mechanics or plumbers. So anyway, I and my cousins ended up outside Auschwitz, a satellite camp called Buna Fabrik.
Now, before that, you mentioned before something about Auschwitz being different than Warsaw Ghetto.
Yeah, because I myself feel that the Warsaw Ghetto was worse than Auschwitz. For one thing, there was more. It was organized. You got a piece of bread in the morning and a bit of water soup in the evening, but at least you had it. You got it. And Warsaw Ghetto, no. If you didn't have anything to sell, if you didn't do this, that, and that, there was nothing to eat. So if you walked along the streets of Warsaw Ghetto, you see people, children, wives, just sitting on the sidewalk and starving on the spot. And other sides which you could see were horrible. Dogs were eating up these people because dogs were hungry, and whether they came from the outside or inside the ghetto, they chewed up the dead people.
Alive people?
Yeah. Well, half dead. And another thing which we get all the time is that when the people stayed outside and they got frozen and died, the first thing the Jewish people, with the help of the police, had to do was to take these corpses, put them on little hand cart, and cart them away to a cemetery or the gravesite. Another thing which I remember about the Warsaw Ghetto is that there was an epidemic of typhus disease. And so the Germans were afraid of the typhus because, illness doesn't recognize who you are. If it spreads, if it's infectious and people catch it. So they used a disinfectant for typhus, and so everything was sprayed, and so was this in the ghetto was this constant smell of the disinfectant they used. And so these things made me always believe that things in Warsaw Ghetto, the way I saw them, and it must have got worse as time went on, because as I said, I left in 1941.
You mentioned something about your family.
Yeah, what was so hard to see is the suffering of your members of the family, which made it hard. The parents didn't like to see their children die. And vice versa, the children didn't like to see what was happening to the parents. Whereas in Auschwitz, you were just by yourself. I was with the cousins, but we were still regarded as We were perhaps lucky. Most other people didn't have anybody. There was this whole survivors. So whatever happened to them happened. They didn't. We're so close to death. So we roughly accepted the fact that we're going to die at any moment. Now then, yeah, I mentioned earlier that we volunteered to work in Auschwitz, so rather than sitting there in the main Auschwitz compound, which there was nothing to do, we went to this satellite Auschwitz thing, where we did some work, and so we became somewhat useful. And then I worked there until, for a few months, from the time I arrived there in Auschwitz. Within a week or two I started working there, until the whole Auschwitz compound was liquidated. And it was liquidated in January of 1945 because of the coming of the Russian army that was invading Germany from the other side, Poland from the east side. And as I mentioned to you at the beginning of the session, that the, so to say, exodus, the leaving out, vacating Auschwitz, which involved a death march, was very well described by Elie Wiesel in his book The Night.
Now, did you take part in that?
Yeah, everybody did. There was no... Auschwitz was finished in one single swoop. There was a mass of people, a column as long as a mile. I don't know how long it was. I don't know how many people were involved. I'm sure that people who wrote the book took the trouble to find out.
What was your experience? What was your experience of that march?
It was, I think we were given sort of a loaf of bread, half a bread, I don't know what. And we were asked to take whatever we wanted to take. So like, people had a little package. I don't know what you could take because you never had anything. So perhaps your main possession was that piece of bread they gave you. And we started marching towards the end of the day. And we did not know where we were going. And it was winter, and it was cold, and there was snow on the road. And we marched all night.
I'm going to stop here and pick up with the next tape. This is tape 5 with Michael Novice. Tape 5 with Michael Novice. So you started your death march?
Well,
and your destination?
The whole camp at Auschwitz was liquidated or terminated by people again being asked to assemble and go somewhere and start marching. And we marched on that road for a whole night. And since we were not in good shape, a lot of people couldn't carry on with that march. And so all that was necessary for people to do is just get out of the column of people, just go to the side and perhaps sit down in the snow on a stone or just on the ground. Some people did it just to have a rest, and the intention was to continue marching once they caught the breath. And some people had intention, they said they can't walk, they can't do it, whatever happens, happened. And true enough, happened within just a few minutes. He was shot. And that mass of people, as I said, the whole Auschwitz camp marched. But the Germans who guarded, they were on the right side and the left side, riding motorbikes or some trucks or what have you. So whenever they saw somebody sitting or lying down on the ground, they just shot them. And also by marching up and down, they kept control that everybody was moving.
Did you have shoes?
We had shoes. Yeah.
What kind of shoes were they?
In my particular case, it's really just an incident. I don't know how and what I got the shoes, but they were somewhat tight, small size. Because when you acquire something, especially with a bit of shoes, it's not like going to a store and trying out one pair of shoes and trying to walk around and deciding, no, it's a little too small. You just got a pair of shoes and you just use them. How I got these shoes, I don't know. They may have been given to me, just like the jackets and the other thing was given to me. Some of the shoes which I had was not comfortable and small. So in addition to everything else, I had that pain from walking in tight shoes, uncomfortable shoes. And we marched all night. And I think the name of the place where we stopped was called Gleiwitz. It was a brick factory, and that's where we were allowed to sort of rest up. And it is possible that they also gave us perhaps a piece of bread to eat. And then before the day was out, we were asked to board the carriages, the train, and especially brought us to Gleiwitz. Don't know why, because that's where the trains were. I don't know why they couldn't load us up in Auschwitz and take us to Buchenwald, but that's the way it was. So that group, and by now it consisted mainly of men, working men, because women or children were not existent anymore, not with us. So we were holding in this carriages. Now this time, for some reason, they were open carriages. And it was winter, and it was snowing. And as I said, the destination was from Auschwitz or Gleiwitz to Buchenwald, going through Czechoslovakia and Germany. And I remember as the train passed, the Czech population looked down from bridges or other places, and they couldn't. They must have understood what was going on, but they couldn't help us. I don't think that they threw any food to us or anything like that. But I think the journey took quite a few days. But when it ended, we found ourselves in another uncomfortable place called Buchenwald. It differed somehow in its character from Auschwitz, but it was also very bad.
Did everybody survive this journey?
No, by many means. I wouldn't know whether 50% or 25% survived. And in fact, one thing that people had to do every morning was to realize who was still alive and who was not alive. And they just opened the door and you just pushed the body out for it to fall down, either on the platform or down below on the truck, and that was the end of that person. People were so weak that and dejected and sort of gave up everything that sometimes you didn't recognize a live person who still had a little bit of life in him and a completely dead person. So by the time we landed in Buchenwald, there was definitely a great reduction.
Do you know how many?
No, I would not know, but people who made a study of that know. I wouldn't be surprised if this one here, written here, the night, this is the march out of Auschwitz called the night. I think he wrote it in French first, Elie Wiesel, and he called it La Nuit, which is French for night. It's definitely known how many people survived the march.
Now, when you arrived to Buchenwald...
Buchenwald was also a terrible place, but somewhat...
Can you describe what it looked like?
It was empty, cold, unfriendly, and we were again given some tasks for work which involved somehow carting stones from one place to another. And once you carried out that work, there were the Nazi overseers with sticks in the hand, and every time they thought you slow down, they hit you on the head, on the body, wherever, and schnell weitermachen, just to prod you on to move around and not to take it too easy, kind of thing. You were perhaps a little bit slow because of tiredness and weariness. So,
was it closed?
Pardon?
Was it closed?
Closed.
Buchenwald, was it closed? Was it barbed wired?
It was barbed wire, yeah. There was not possible to escape or anything like that. But my thinking in that of my cousin was very much the same as that in Auschwitz. We could see what was going on, and we could somehow conclude that we were not going to last even a week. It was just a matter of days, perhaps even hours, before it was our turn to disappear, the way other people around us disappeared. So the thing repeated itself somehow, very much the same as Auschwitz. Again, it was somehow announced that they needed some workers.
Before that, in Buchenwald, did you get any food?
I think we did get some food.
How often?
Usually, at the best, it was twice a day. One in the morning, and then you somehow were taken out to do something, some work, and when you came back from that work, back to the place where you could spend the night, they gave you a soup.
Did you get to have showers?
In Buchenwald? I cannot remember.
How did you do with hygiene?
It was sort of like non-existent. In fact, now I ask myself, and when I give myself the answer, I feel that's impossible. We never had a toothbrush, we never had a towel, we never had a bar of soap, nothing. When we went to sleep, we never changed clothes, like a pajama or nothing. Anyway, in Buchenwald, some German officials came, they needed some workers. So again, we volunteered. So there was another little bit of a satellite outside Buchenwald, and that place was called Krawinkel.
How do you spell that?
K-R-A-W-I-N-K-E-L. Kel, Krawinkel. It was also known somehow like the Zeltlager. And so we left the main Buchenwald complex and moved there. And it was like a place in the hills, caves in a mountain. And this is where the Germans stored their ammunition. And it was camouflaged. So people when it came to bombarding a place like that, it could not be detected. But when we came, the place was empty. So we were placed there for sleeping purposes. And then we were sort of taken out by trucks to do some work outside by a railway station. That's my recollection of what we did outside Buchenwald in this place called the Gravwinkel. And then this
Were
was
you
already...
guarded?
Pardon?
Were you guarded?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Were you able to stop for a little bit and
Yeah,
rest?
yeah. One thing which I also remember about this, all camps, Auschwitz, Buchenwald, and especially Gravwinkel, is that the morning started perhaps after you got a piece of bread, where you had to go to what they call the Appellplatz. Appell, forget what it means in German. Anyway, it was a collection place where people had to line up and be counted. And for some reason or other, it was unnecessarily long. People stood there naked, more or less, undressed, cold wind, standing there for hours until the Germans after, but they got up in due time and they had their breakfast and we had to stand there already and they came and they counted us. That's what the word appel means.
What if someone was missing?
Then they had to be accounted for. And also during the appel times, I think it was both in the morning and the evening when it came back. If someone was caught misbehaving, either tried to escape or for some other things, the people were hung on primitive means.
Did you know
could
anybody?
see 3 or 4 people hanging there, and everybody had to pass by or look at these people that were hung. The object being to discourage people from doing whatever they were trying, particularly escaping. Or perhaps not even escaping, stealing something or so. They may have caught you perhaps having a raw potato from somewhere. That was already good enough cause for being hanged.
How often was it happening?
Often not, perhaps on the average once a week.
Did you know any of the people?
No.
So how long did you stay at Gravwinkel?
At Gravwinkel, I must just summarize by saying the end after Auschwitz and the Buchenwald and the Gravwinkel was sort of quickly changing scenery because it all happened already in 1945. And by May 45, I was already in another place. This Gravwinkel, when it was realized that the American army was coming, they took us back to the main compound of Buchenwald. because the place Gravenkel was like a little satellite, a little bit working place from Buchenwald. And from Buchenwald, they again made us march somewhere, again overnight. And we were again hoarded on the train, the open carriage trains.
Where was that? Where did you get on the train?
Where? Within marching distance of the Buchenwald main camp. We didn't know where we were going. And this was again the last, but no means the least, painful trip. And that is from Buchenwald to Theresienstadt, Czechoslovakia. And the time period must have been sometimes in April of 1945. And again, there was a shortage of food, but everything was already disorganized, because the German guides who had radios and communication, they already knew that the war was lost as far as the German army, German people. And yet, in spite of that, rather than just leaving us, they could have just left us in Buchenwald or even in Auschwitz. The guards who guarded us could have just disappeared, and they could have left us to our own devices. No, they didn't do that, to the very, very bitter end. They just kept us under their control, without any food, and until really the war ended, which was May 8th.
Before that, how long were you in Theresienstadt before the war ended?
Perhaps a couple days.
Did you get to work there at all?
No, no.
Who was
when we came to Theresienstadt, it was like sort of, we couldn't believe ourselves that a place like that existed. Because
what did you see?
We could see Jewish people. They may have had a yellow star, but they were dressed and walking around. And there were women there together with the men. And there was some food, and everything sort of looked like a reasonable place compared to the hell we came from. And some people started like eating either when the war was still on, or in particular when the war actually ended, but we still found ourselves in Theresienstadt. And they overate, and they either got ill from overeating, or in the recovered, or they just died on account of that. So people died from all sorts of causes. As I said, from marching, from being beaten, from overeating or eating the wrong stuff.
So you were there a couple of days, and then
I was already somewhat sick.
From what?
So, from what? I must have had pleurisy, cough, and fever. So when I was in Theresienstadt, and I was told that the war ended, and that the German guards ran away, and that the Russian army liberated the camp, I was physically unable to get out of the bed or whatever it was.
Did it register that you were freed?
Yeah, it was registered, right? At least that was the good part, and that is that we were not afraid of being killed by the Nazis. But it was still a struggle to stay alive. And
what day was it that you got liberated?
I think May. May the 8th, May the 6th, May the 7th.
So what happened then, after you were liberated?
I became ill, and somehow in Dresdenstadt the Russian army had some sort of a makeshift, or they created a sick bay or a hospital or something like that. And at one point I think that the summer Raphael like gave up on me. They left me there with a few others who really died, and I somehow managed to turn around and improve health-wise and recover. And then I was told by other people that being young I was qualified to join a youth group.
What was the
And
name
now
of
the war already ended. That was the end of the war. Already ended. It was just a question of having enough strength to carry on and deciding where you go from there.
How old were you at this point?
17, going to 18.
And this youth group, what was this youth group?
The youth group was a collection of youth, and that's where the word boys comes in. The British government gave permission for 1,000 youngsters to come to England, and it was the responsibility of the Jewish Refugee Committee in Britain to become financially responsible, so they're not a charge or a burden to the government. And although permission was given for 1,000, they couldn't find more than about 730, or just over 700.
What was this book that was in your hand?
Right, the book called The Boys, because most of the surviving people were actually boys, although there were a few girls, and the reason why it was boys is that the boys made themselves more useful to work than girls.
Were you part of the board?
I was part of this group, and I can be seen here in the photograph here. This picture here was taken in Prague. It was taken in August.
Can you show it? Can you hold it up? Yeah, this is good. This is good.
I was trying to find an
Okay. Would you like to read a passage there?
All right, let me read something from the jacket here. It says here, when Britain declared itself willing in the summer of 1945 to take in 1,000 young survivors of the Holocaust, no more than 732 could be found. During the following 8 months, they were flown in from Prague and Munich to Windermere and Southampton. These are places in Britain, as well as to Scotland and Ireland. The boys, as they called themselves, there were girls among them too, became a tightly knit group of friends whose shared wartime experiences were terrible beyond imagining, but whose companionship gave them a lifetime once they were in England.
Now, who wrote this?
Written by a pretty well-known writer and a British historian called Martin Gilbert.
And did you have anything to do with this book?
Yeah, so let me tell you something. This book was published about a year after 1995, when a lot of us survivors gathered in London to celebrate the 50th anniversary of coming to England. And at that time, Martin Gilbert was somehow already associated with the group. And then Martin Gilbert mentioned that if people were to write to him and recount the stories, the wartime experiences, he would publish it in a book. So this thing is based on what the material he received.
Did you send him material?
I sent him the material, and the beginning of the book, one of the few pages, gives a list of contributors of the stories of the book, and my name appears among the contributors.
So, tell me about your journey to England from where you were.
Well, the journey to England, once the war ended, although things were hard, but there was sort of already like a difference between day and night. You were not afraid that someone would come and kill you. Now, in August...
Of what year?
Pardon?
Of what year?
August 1945. 3 months after the liberation, so we were in Dresdenstadt for 3 months. Adult people who already had a profession, knew where they wanted to go, especially non-Jewish people, definitely. You know, when the war ended, non-Jewish people knew exactly where they're going, and that is to the place where they were born, where they had family and things like that. But the Jewish people never knew where they were going to go, because they knew they were not welcome in the old places.
I'm going to stop here and pick up with the next tape. This is tape 6 with Michael Novice, tape 6 with Michael Novice. So you were telling me about your journey to England.
Right.
How did you get in touch with that group, with that youth group?
I mentioned that I was somewhat sick in Dresdenstadt, and then somehow or other someone told me that I would be qualified to join a youth group that had permission to go to England. So I joined that group. And there were some people there, possibly from England or from some other countries, Jewish people, who became the madrichim, or sort of supervisors of that group. And they helped us to register and assemble in a certain place and be transported to England.
How did you transport it to England?
Right. We went to Prague from Dresdenstadt, which was not very far, possibly by bus. And in Prague we had this picture taken, and we went to the airport, and there at the airport stood British bombers, not passenger planes. The windows of the planes were still blocked out with the blue paint, so that they wouldn't be noticed at night when the light was on inside. There were no seats, so we sat on the floor. And for the first time we were able to speak to civilized people, namely the English pilots. And there must have been quite a few of these planes. So once we took off from Prague, it was non-stop to the north part of England. And the reason why they used the north part of England was that that is where, during the war, the Royal Air Force, known as the RAF, Royal Air Force, they had the barracks there. That's where they were positioned, away from the south, which was open to attack from Germany. But in the north, close to Scotland, in a place called Windermere, which is a beautiful lake district. This is where these barracks were available, having been vacated by the RAF people, personnel that were not needed any longer because the war was ended. And so it formed like a reception center. So I was one of the 700 people who arrived, not on one plane, perhaps not in one time. And I enjoyed staying there for a little while. Food was available and new clothing, and we couldn't believe that we really had what we had, and that we had to remind ourselves that we were not persecuted any longer. But in my particular case, I soon reverted to the illness which I contracted in the Theresienstadt. And by that time it was found that I had TB on the lung. And so they took me out from the group and sent me to a sanatorium. It was called the Westmoreland Sanatorium, north of England. And there I was under the supervision of doctors and x-rays and treatments. There wasn't much of treatment at that time. You could do it, all that one could do with such a disease is just rest and hope for the best. So I stayed in this sanatorium for a few months. And then the Jewish Refugee Committee arranged for me and two other boys to come down and join another place where it acted like a convalescent home. And that place was called Ashford Sanatorium. And from Ashford Sanatorium we moved to a cheaper place known as the Quare Mead, also all the southern part of England. And that was a convalescent home run by the Jewish Refugee Committee. It was like a little hostel where there was a sister in charge, and a doctor from the village came and sort of helped us with our sickness. And on the whole, the young people quickly recovered from the illness. And then it was a question of finding a job, because the Jewish Refugee Committee, who looked after you and who was responsible financially, they couldn't afford to keep you for any length of time. Money was always limited, so they helped you find relatives, if you had any relatives, or they helped you find a profession in order to become independent and start earning as soon as possible.
Did you find a profession?
Now, in my particular case, because I was ill, the Jewish Refugee Committee allowed me to study. So I started studying by correspondence course, because I was, in fact, not well enough physically to attend the school. And also there was this language difficulty. So I started studying by a correspondence course, and so that at the end of 1947, or beginning of January 1948, I passed my first mark of the studying career, because if I hadn't passed it, I would have, the permission to go on would have been taken away from me. And this exam was known as, in England they call it matriculation. Here they would possibly call it...
Was it equivalent of high school?
perhaps a little bit less.
Did you ever find out what happened to your parents?
No.
What happened to your cousins that were with you?
Right, because my cousin was older than I was in Theresienstadt, he could not join the young group that went to England. So he stayed. He went back to Austria and Germany, sort of spent perhaps a year moving from place to place. And in the end, he met a lady and he married, and she had relatives in Toronto. So he moved to Canada, Toronto, Canada.
Did you ever get married?
Yes, got
And
married
when did you get married?
1954.
And what was your bride's name?
Bride's name was Ruth Menden. And the way we met was, I mentioned there was this convalescent home where people who were not quite ready to work sort of give me a chance to recover physically. The sister of my wife, she was the matron in charge, the sister in charge of that compound. So Ruth came to relieve her sister because she had to have a weekend off from time to time. So that's how we met.
Did you have any children?
We had children after marrying, right? We married in 54, and our first child was born in 56.
And what is the name of the first child?
First child, Judith, Rachel. And then the next one was Miriam.
And when was she born?
Judith was born in a place called Chelmsford, England. That's where I already worked for a company called English Electric. And Miriam was born in a place called Bromley, Kent, not far from London.
And who's after Miriam?
One other child, a boy called David, and he was also born in Bromley.
When?
In 1962.
Are they married?
They're all married, they've all got children.
What are their spouses' names?
Judith's husband is called Robert Roth, and they've got 3 boys.
And what are their names?
The names of the boys, David, Jonathan, and Benjamin. Then there comes Miriam, married to Richard Singer, also known as Joseph Singer, who's a rabbi, and she's got 5 children.
What are their names?
I maybe getting a little bit mixed up with the names. The oldest is a girl, Batya. Then comes Moshe, Avrami, Yaakov. I'm not so sure that I went through all of them.
One is Miss.
One more. I know they've got one girl, Batya, and 4 boys. So if I've left one out, Avrami, Akiva, I think that must be, yeah. I did not mention Akiva before, so the Akiva, yeah. And Yaakov is the smallest one, the youngest one.
And the children?
David, who happens to live here in San Jose, working in the Silicon Valley industry. He's got 2 girls and 3 boys.
And their names?
The names, one is the oldest, Naphtali. Then the girl is Sarah, another girl, Rivka, and a boy, Chaim, and another boy called Shlomo Zalman.
When did you arrive to the United States?
United States in '64. And one of the reasons why I ended up in the States, England would have been good enough for us. It was a free country. I had started working already in '52. That's when I got my bachelor's degree.
In what?
My bachelor's degree was in physics. And I worked for a company called English Electric, which was a very large company, and Marconi, which is another a pretty well-known company. It's sort of a combined English Electric Marconi company. And
What was the reason for your arrival?
a better job were somehow offered here in this country, and that was because at that time President Kennedy was the president of this country, USA, and he committed the whole country to putting a man on the moon within 10 years, and that sort of gave an impetus to the industry. You know, the sort of the wheels were rolling, everybody was working, government contracts, no shortage of money, and there was a race against time to meet that criterion. And so I was involved in this space business.
What was your position?
My position was with the company to make a TV camera which the astronauts took with them, and when they landed on the moon they photographed using this camera, and the picture was transmitted back to Earth for everybody to see. This Armstrong, the first step on a giant leap with small steps. I forget the famous expression. And then sort of part-time, after working for other companies, I managed to make use of the work I did, which was always research somehow. And I got a master's degree in 1957 and a PhD in 1961. And because of the PhD, which I got in England, when it came time for, that's the time when President Kennedy decided to do this outer space program. They needed scientists. There was a shortage of people. And so particularly people from England, because of the common language, left England and accepted the encouraging jobs offered. And these kinds of jobs were offered by companies advertising in the Sunday papers in England. And the usual ad read, people with such and such, that representatives from such and such company are going to meet in a hotel. Anyone interested or with such and such experience should call up a number and make an appointment. So I sort of, perhaps just for fun, I wanted to see what comes out of it. I answered one ad that called for the experience which I happened to have had from England, and they wanted to have engineers. So I ended up being hired by a company called Westinghouse. The full name was Westinghouse Electron Tube. They were situated in a place called Elmira, which was upstate New York, not far from Rochester, south of Rochester. And so I was brought over, everything paid by the company. We got tickets on the Queen Mary, and so a family of myself, my wife, and 3 children landed in Elmira, and we stayed there for 12 years.
Now it's more than 50 years after the war.
Right.
And you arrived to the United States, you live here, you lived a full and long, with experience life. Based on your life experience, what would be a message that you would like to give, to share, and to leave to the next generations and your grandchildren who will see this tape?
Perhaps the message is that that the Holocaust can repeat itself. and that we have to guard ourselves against it. And in this connection, I really feel that the existence of Israel is extremely important. It's my feeling that if we had a country like Israel, there wouldn't have been the Holocaust. So that's the end of my story.
Is there anything else you would like to add?
Pardon?
Is there anything else you would like to add
To add,
to your testimony?
as you know, there are some people who deny the existence of the Holocaust. But I feel that there are enough good, intelligent people, both Jews and non-Jews, to deal with this thing. But as time goes on, I think the history can be distorted. So we have to guard against that. So apart from little details, there's not really much I can add to what I already said.
Thank you for your time.
Very welcome.
Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you. I would like to.
Who is in this picture?
Right, this picture is one of the oldest pictures of my family. It was taken in Warsaw, sometimes in the early 30s. It is a professional photo taken, and I believe the purpose of taking the photo was to send it to my brother, who at that time left the family and went to study in Paris.
Starting on the left, who is in the picture?
Starting with the left, the lady is my mother, Basia Sosnovitz.
And who's next to her?
Next to her is my brother, second oldest brother, David. That's myself.
And your name?
Meir, Moniek, as I was called at home. My sister, 2 years older than I am, Hella. My father, called Herschel, which completes family. And
Okay, that's fine. This is tape 7 with Michael Novice, tape 7.
okay, this photo is of my oldest brother, Charles Novice, who lived at the time this photo was taken in Paris. And he sent this photo home to our mother, our family living in Warsaw. And the previous picture that was shown of the family was in turn sent by my parents to this brother living in Paris. And it is through him that this photo, as well as any other photos of the family, that were able to survive and be in my possession. Had these photos been with me in Warsaw and in other camps, it would have been impossible for me or for anyone else in a similar situation to carry a photo and come out through the war with a photo in hand.
And when was this picture taken?
This picture was taken again in early 30s, perhaps 33, 34. Right. This picture is possibly one. This picture is representing a wagon or carriage carrying people from Buchenwald to Dresdenstadt. The number of people could have been distributed in perhaps about 10 or 20 of such carriages, and I was one of these people, although they are not to be seen in this photo. It was taken by a Czech cameraman and then later given to one of our people for keepsake.
What year was this?
This was May 1945, just before reaching the Dresdenstadt and just before being liberated by the Russian army.
Stand by.
This is the picture taken in Prague just a few hours before boarding a plane that took us from Prague to England. It shows the group of boys who left Theresienstadt and went to England, and this very same photo is used in the book by Martin Gilbert called The Boys.
Are you in this picture?
I'm in this picture. It's coming closer. You see here in the picture a lady, and behind the lady is a head, which is myself, Michael Novice. You can see that I have still got short hair because at the time of liberation we had a shaven head, no hair at all, so the hair is growing back, and all the other boys look well.
You want to point to where you are?
Right.
In the picture.
That's me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And when was this picture taken?
This picture was in Prague. It's not seen very clearly, but there's an inscription here on the statue, and it shows some sort of a prominent figure in Czechoslovakia.
Where? What year was this?
The only time I was in Prague, as distinct from the camp of Theresienstadt, which was close to Prague, was when it was time to board a plane in the Prague airport.
Okay.
This is a family photo taken in 1994. And now this is David Roth. That's the brother of David Roth called Jonathan. That is another boy called Avrami from another child of mine. This is Sarah.
Whose sons are they?
Sarah is the daughter of my one and only son David here in San Jose, and the other children shown were the children from my two daughters. So for instance, this first one on the left is David Roth, the older son of my daughter Judith. Roth. And that is the brother of David called Jonathan. This one here, Akiva, is the son of my other daughter called Miriam Singer. That is the same family, Moshe Singer.
And what is her
Moshe
name?
Singer carries a photograph of his father, Rabbi Yosef Singer, who at the time when this picture was taken was out of town and could not join the group. So that's why his son carries a picture of him.
And who's next to him?
That's Moshe's sister, Batya Singer, and she is the oldest child of that family. This one here is the son of my son. His name is Naphtali Novice.
Is he on the right or the left of the picture?
Just this one, right in the center here. That's Naphtali. That's Naphtali's brother, Chaim Novice. He's being carried by his mother, Jordana Novice. And that is another daughter of Jordana Novice called Rivka Novice. And that's my son, David Novice, Jordana's husband. This is my daughter, Judith. And to the left of her is her husband, Robert Roth. And this is my other daughter, Miriam Singer. And she carries the youngest at the time.
Is it Akiva?
No, that is, what is me?
Was it Avrami?
No, Avrami is, I think, another, Akiva, must be Akiva, right. She's carrying Akiva. All right, this is the photo of myself next to my wife, Ruth.
And your name is?
My name is Michael Novice, next to my wife, Ruth Novice. I think we've gone through everybody here now. All right, this is a family photo taken in 1997, I believe. This is a shot of my son-in-law, Dr. Richard Singer, also known as Rabbi Yosef Singer, the husband of my daughter Miriam. This is Benjamin Roth, the son of my daughter Judith Roth. This is
Is this Akiva?
no,
Is this
this
Yaakov?
is Yaakov. Yaakov, the son of Rabbi Yosef Singer or Miriam Singer.
Where was this picture taken?
This picture was taken on the East Coast in Washington, D.C. All right, this is a photo, a fairly recent one, of myself, Michael Novice, holding my newest and latest grandchild number 13. His name is Yaakov. His name is Shlomo Zalman Novice, the son of my son David Novice.